Ladies and gentlemen, today is day 294 of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation in Ukraine. My name is Andrei Shevchenko, and on behalf of the team of Ukraine Media Center Ukrinform, I want to thank all the journalists who tell the truth about our fight for freedom. Today we're having a special event. Our guest today is the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Ukrainian Parliament, Dmytro Lubinets, and we will be talking about the special report of the Commissioner for Human Rights about the adherence with the rights of the people affected by the war of Russia against Ukraine. The barbaric nature of the Russian war against Ukraine is one of the reasons why the position of the Commissioner for the Human Rights became the issue of national security. This is a key issue for the victory and for justice regarding everything what's happening during this aggression. Present in our studio today are important guests, the Minister of Social Policy, Vitaly Muzichenko. Please show yourself so the journalists see you. Sergei Dumsky, the Deputy of the State Migration Service of Ukraine. Denis Chestikov, the Deputy of the Representative of the President of Ukraine in the Republic of Crimea. And I think these people may be of interest to the journalists present today in this studio. After the event, we will be able to ask the questions to the Commissioner for Human Rights. And now it's my pleasure to invite Dmytro Lubinets, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Parliament of Ukraine. Thank you. Good afternoon, dear colleagues. Good afternoon, Ukraine. We will build our report today in the following way. Within the next 20 minutes, I will try to present what we've seen and described, and then we will have an opportunity to have a Q&A session. So this is my special report I'm having in my hand. It was disseminated to everybody present in this studio. For us, it's the first project of this type, and from the very beginning I would like to thank the Office of the Council of Europe for their support of this project. Dear colleagues, I have to say that this work was not easy. I'm sure you will see not only figures in the report, but what's more important to me are the recommendations that will be forwarded to the Cabinet of Ministers, to Parliament of Ukraine, to law enforcement agencies. And the task of our team is not only to describe it in the report, but the following task is to control within our mandate the way our recommendations will be implemented. And should they not be implemented, we will thoroughly inspect and we will try to hear the arguments why doing so is impossible from those bodies who, in our opinion, should be responsible for certain activities. So, I'm trying to switch the picture. All right, it works. So, dear colleagues, it's been almost 9 years of the international military conflict between Russian Federation and Ukraine. I just used that definition in accordance with international humanitarian law. What we really understand that we're having an open war when Russian Federation openly tries to capture the whole territory of our country. Incessant bombardments of critical infrastructure, water supply, waterways, and power infrastructure makes a lot of our citizens displaced, leave their homes, and unfortunately we document the cases when 4,900,000 citizens of Ukraine became internally displaced within our country. 30% of them are pensioners and people with disabilities. So, in fact, every other family has one or more kids. 13 million of the citizens of Ukraine still remain in the areas of the active warfare. The government initiated the practice of evacuation of our citizens of Ukraine from places which are on the brink of humanitarian catastrophe. According to our data, 46,000 people were 46 citizens of Ukraine were evacuated. 7,900,000 left abroad, trying to find safe shelter abroad. So it's basically 20% of the population of the country. The principle stipulated in our special report, in view of the systematical infringement of the right of person, is the investigation of cases and situations for the purpose of finding ways and prevention of the cases like that in future. Our report consists of 5 sections. Ensuring the rights of the internally displaced persons, compliance with the rights and freedoms of the people living in the areas of the active warfare, infringement of the internally displaced rights and infringement of people's rights during warfare, and ensuring of compliance with the rights of the persons who left the territory of Ukraine, and deportation and forcible displacement of people to Russian Federation. I have to say that we did not investigate the issue of infringement of children's rights and infringement of the civil hostages and military combatants. Why? Because we thought that special attention should be paid to those issues, and I have to officially inform you that we're currently working on 2 special reports, one of which will investigate the issues of our children who live in Ukraine or left Ukraine abroad, including the forced deportation by Russian Federation as the component of the war crimes which should be called genocide of the Ukrainian nation. This is another investigation we're doing within the framework of our work, and so those will be the different issues investigated with regard to military and civil hostages as well. It's my pleasure to have the representatives of the Security Service of Ukraine, the Ministry of Temporarily Occupied Territories, who directly work with us on a daily basis on the return of our heroes back home. And this is what we're working on in our special report. From the beginning of the year 2022, our institution received reports and applications about 2,087 internally displaced persons. You can see the breakdown by criteria of what about people report to us. So the most widespread violation is the social protection rights is 30%. Other applications reported in terms of implementation of and exercising of human rights. The ensuring of rights to dwelling remains the key problem for the internally displaced persons. We all understand that when people move, the first issue for them is the issue of dwelling, where to live. And here we think that on part of the state, they should have the financial support and legal support. We separately investigate this issue, how the state, how the government exercises this role, and we propose that the government and other central government and local governments should approve the state program for provision of dwellings for internally displaced persons. So this is a very sharp issue which requires extensive financial support. However, in our opinion, the approval of this program will be an indicator of our understanding of the scale of the problem, we can at least calculate some figure, some certain figure, which we may use to find the source of funding for this program. We may resort to the help of our international partners among the whole scope of aid and support we are receiving. We also recommend to approve the law on compensation for the damage and destruction of the real estate, specifically in the temporarily occupied territories. Again, this issue is being omitted because everybody understands the great scale, but again, our attitude to the temporarily occupied territories is the following. We all say that we are preparing to return our temporarily occupied territories, so the first step to demonstrate our intention is what the citizens of Ukraine who come to the liberated territory, what would they receive? So we should give them the vision of what we're doing. We're helping our citizens to renew their real estate, to rebuild their real estate. We also have to pay attention that the announced program DIA, for example, where people can report the information about the destroyed properties. The section has a technical option to add the information about the real estate damaged this year, but we're saying that the real estate was damaged starting from 2014. So one of our recommendations is to have the DIA application to comprise an option for the citizens of Ukraine to report the data starting from about their destroyed property starting from 2014. The same applies to the financial support for the persons with disabilities and the evaluation of the current needs of the internally displaced individuals. So we use DIA application not only for collecting information, but also as an application that after collection of information may transfer or distribute that information to the relevant government agencies. Next, starting from the beginning of the full-scale invasion of the Russian Federation in Ukraine, the internal displacement, as we've seen by the figures, it took an unprecedented scale. The strategy of work with the internally displaced should be used as the indicator for the government of how to act in current circumstances. So our report contains the main issues with regard to the internally displaced persons. For example, the government currently contemplates the mechanism of a selective inspections of the internally displaced persons according to the addresses reported by those individuals. I think it's a discriminatory standard. I understand that the government may use some criteria. For example, if the government issues certain aid, provides some aid to the individual, the government has a right to inspect the activities of such individual. If if the state already assigned the status of internally displaced person to an individual, if they understand that their property is destroyed, so it's a nonsense to inspect their activities during work time. So people may be working on, they may be looking for a job, they may be in queue to receive the humanitarian aid from an international institution. So we will aspire to cancellation of that standard. And the mechanism of calculation of pensions for internally displaced who were the residents of the Autonomous Republic of Crimea, the figure that we've seen, the great problem that we've seen, it's more than 12 billion hryvnias. That's the figure that the state of Ukraine should pay to its citizens who are assigned the status of pensioners. So the majority of those people who applied and who are authorized to receive such pensions, they already submitted to Ukrainian courts, they received the court awards, and many of them already resort to European Court for Human Rights. And I can tell you that, I can confidently tell you that it's 99% possibility that they will win those cases, and they will obviously receive those payments from the state of Ukraine, which will amount to from 5 to 25,000 euro from the state of Ukraine. And this is not a small number, more than 12 billion hryvnias. However, nevertheless, we require the state not only to understand the scale, but also to find the funds for to allocate for those payments, because the problem becomes snowballing, and in future the state will have to pay one way or another, but they will have to pay more than they can pay now. And the problem is that additionally the state requires such pensioners to provide certificates that don't get pension payments from other countries. So we find it impossible, for example, to receive such certificate from Russia, because they're the aggressor state and they will not issue any certificates to the citizens of Ukraine. So separately, we would like to monitor this situation, and we will bring up this issue during government meetings. Next, recommendation as to the compliance with the rights and freedoms of the persons who reside in the temporarily occupied territories. So it's the recognition of the procedures for temporarily occupied and deoccupied territories. So the current procedure is not rapid enough. The procedure for amendment of the list of the territories under temporary occupation is quite lengthy, and the recognition of mechanism of application of criminal law to the persons who live in the temporarily occupied territories. So that's another issue we've been investigating, and in compliance with the law, in effect, we can confidently say that any individual living currently in the temporarily occupied territory, according to the law in effect, may be criminally persecuted. So there is a law adopted by the law adopted by Ukrainian Parliament is written in a way that any person, if the law enforcement agencies say want, they may open a criminal case against such individuals. So on one hand, I can say that we thoroughly monitor this situation, and I can note positive experience demonstrated currently by our law enforcement agencies, because criminal liability is not being spread upon the or is being applied to the persons who were taking part in organization of the temporarily occupational governments in Ukraine. So it's a good practice when we see the security service of Ukraine, they publicly announced that the person detained was taking part in organization of an illegal referendum, or was taking part in drawing up the lists of activists in temporarily Ukrainian activists in temporarily occupied territories. But again, we emphasize that the law in effect enables the law enforcement agencies to provide to assign criminal indicators to the activities of the people who were just ended up in the occupied territories. So our approaches here are different. Even the acquisition of a passport of Russian Federation by a Ukrainian citizen. So on one hand, we don't recognize such passportization, but on the other hand, we hear from the representatives of the government that it should be punished by criminal liability. We categorically deny those cases. We have cases when people stay in the temporarily occupied territories contrary to their desire, and just to survive they are forced to acquire those passports. If we emphasize that we don't understand that process, why should we require criminal liability for the fact of acquisition of a Russian Federation passport? We did not recognize it in Autonomous Republic of Crimea, and we cannot recognize it in the rest of the temporarily occupied territories of Ukraine. The registration of birth and deaths, marriages and divorces in temporarily occupied territories under administrative procedure. All the human rights organizations bring up this issue during years because forcing people to get Ukrainian documents through court procedure is just the additional pressure on our court system, and we have to enable the ease of access to these procedures for our citizens. Yeah, I'm expediting my report. The next is the ease of access to the free legal help, exemption from liability for the infringement of procedure of entering to the temporarily occupied territories and leaving it. I have to pay your attention that Ukrainian parliament adopted the law which enables not to administratively punish the persons who, for example, leave the occupied territories through Crimea, then go to Poland, and then come back to Ukraine through Poland. We still document the cases when the State Border Guard, they issue administrative protocols for the penalties. So we understand that those people cross the Ukrainian border in illegal way, so to say, but our parliament already adopted the law which allows the State Border Guard not to do that, but we still document cases. And another thing is the recognition of the results of study and qualification by the persons who receive study certificates in the temporarily occupied territories. But only for, again, we demonstrate that we demonstrate our attitude. If an individual, if a citizen enters a Ukrainian higher educational institution and then there is occupation, so we want the procedure to be developed which could confirm, which could allow that person to confirm their qualification. Maybe the individual was studying remotely, so let it pass some additional qualification exams and receive a Ukrainian diploma. Their next recommendations as to the compliance with international humanitarian law and human rights during warfare. First is the recognition of the legal status of the persons afflicted by the armed aggression against Ukraine and their social guarantees. They should contemplate the notion of the person afflicted by the armed aggression against Ukraine, categorization of such persons, compensation of damage inflicted on those affected, and the methods for accounting for the persons who suffered death, injury, or harm to their health. So we have to be prepared that our citizens, either now or upon the final victory, people should understand the mechanism of how to apply for additional aid, for additional help in case of heavy bodily harm in case of death of a closed one. We somehow remember about some property, about real estate, about damaged real estate, vehicles, but nobody says about the lost health, because it also requires special attention on part of our government, on part of our state, and as an additional, it should be an additional instrument for receiving the funds from aggressor state. And the next, what we're observing now, a very good example is the number of mines left by the Russian occupiers in the Kherson region as they were withdrawing. And we see our agencies involved in demining. Unfortunately, we have tragic cases when the representatives of the national police and the state emergency service unfortunately perish. So we need to develop additional strategy to protect our citizens from mine danger, and the special strategy for normalization of life and activities in the deoccupied areas, and development of the strategy for the cartographic marking of mined areas. So using international experience, we have to develop establish a special fund, and we have to do some additional work in this regard. Recommendation as to compliance with the rights of the citizens who left the territory of Ukraine. So it's collection and the evaluation of the needs of the citizens. We understand that we're talking about millions of our citizens, and our recommendations are to increase the number of separate units of DP document abroad. So even based on our institution, we had the expanded discussion with the representatives of Ministry of Foreign Affairs, and I can directly say that I thank the State Migration Service for such initiative. We cannot expect our consular and diplomatic institutions to cope with millions of citizens who additionally apply for Ukrainian documents in future. They are not built like that. They were not organized for that for this purpose. So we've seen this instrument is right. It's very innovative. We have 4 new departments open in Poland, and we plan to open more departments in other countries. We support it. We have another recommendation that our Ministry of Foreign Affairs support the opening of such additional departments of state enterprise document abroad. And as a recommendation, again, it's the application to the government so they could financially support the expansion of staff of our diplomatic and consular offices abroad. The reinforcement of the consular monitoring of the children, of the orphan children and children deprived of parents, and enabling of a remote exchange of the driver's license and issues of the new driver's license for the drivers who are currently abroad. We want them to be able to do it remotely, understanding the scale of the problem. And the provision of the help during the birth of a child for the children born abroad. So now we require the people to come back to Ukraine so they could submit the certificate of birth to obtain such help. So what we propose as a recommendation, we currently have pilot project, the joint monitoring visits with the commissioners for human rights of the different countries. For example, in Poland, where we already established we detected the violations on part of our representatives who work abroad in other countries. We even witnessed some critical cases when one of the girls became pregnant. And again, in our opinion, like that girl is 16 years old. First of all, is the underperformance of certain managers who on a daily basis monitor our children. And another innovative recommendation from us, we started creating our representative offices of our institution abroad, and it's the first experience we're having. And I appointed the first representative, and I already introduced them in Great Britain. I'll tell you why, because the first manager who came personally was the Prime Minister of Great Britain, and that was the way for us to demonstrate how we value such support. So our representatives work on a volunteer basis. They meet the citizens of Ukraine. They try to sort out their problems. They support the consular department in Great Britain, and they sort out all the necessary issues. So the first question is to support the opening of this state enterprise document department in London, so the people who reside in Great Britain can receive new documents without leaving the territory of the Great Britain. Recommendations as to the compliance with the rights of the internally displaced and forcibly deported persons. So is the algorithm for collecting data on the internally displaced and forcibly deported persons and compliance with the recommendations of international organizations. So first of all, we're talking about the territory of Russian Federation. We understand that Russia does not only provide us with any information, they do not assist in the returning of our kids, which it forcibly deports. But we have to find mechanism, for example, involving international organizations, humanitarian organizations, and we officially applied to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to understand whether they work additionally on establishing of a mandate for a state as a foster state, like the state which may provide consular services to the citizens of Ukraine in Russian Federation. Currently, we're working this issue with Switzerland. Russian Federation did not meet our expectations in this regard, so we don't understand whether that work already ended or we're looking for another country who may work with that mandate. The worst is that we're not seeing anything with regard to this work in either public space and we're not getting any response to our applications. The return of the children deported to Russian Federation, identification of deported persons, and renewal of the lost documents, and the spread of information on. And I want to thank the Ministry of Justice who promptly responds our requests. So I can apply to the national courts in the interest of any citizens of Ukraine for renewal of their documents. We keep doing this. Ministry of Justice assists us in a very steady manner, and we return both the children and the adults from Russian Federation and other occupied territories. And the spread of information, as one of the examples, we launched an online platform, Children of War, where you can immediately see the number of kids who were verified, who were forcibly deported to Russian Federation, and how many children we already returned. Well, I've tried to explain everything in the fastest manner possible. I understand there will be questions, but for us, the main desire is not to conceal the scale of the problem and to require the relevant institutions to react and to demonstrate their desire, their aspiration to change this situation. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dmytro. We understand that it raises the bar of responsibility for the Ukrainian government. In a couple of minutes, we will be able to ask questions from Mr. Dmytro. And now I want to invite Ms. Hanna Hristova, who represents the Council of Europe. She is the manager of the program of the internal displacement. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Commissioner for Human Rights. And first of all, let me, on behalf of the project who takes care of the internal displacement, starting from 2016. However, as we know, the first phase of the armed conflict against Ukraine started in 2014. I want to thank you and your team who are taking care of the protection of the rights of the persons affected by the armed aggression, and under management of Ms. Olga Altunina, all the representatives of the information department who took all necessary efforts for this report to emerge within such a short period, and obviously all the experts who were taking part in preparation of this report. It's very important for us to be to the maximum extent useful for Ukraine in this fight. And as the General Secretary of the Council of Europe, Maria Pechinovich-Buric, emphasized, Europe stands together with Ukraine in this fight for the human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. And it's very important that Ms. Sterna Norlov, present in Ukraine, here in Kiev with us. It's very important for us as a part of the support of the European Council. As to the report presented today, I have no opportunity to discuss it in details. I mean, the recommendations that were just presented, they are right in front of you, and we hope that they will be the subject to expert discussions in future, and they will be implemented within the shortest period possible. So I just want to pay attention to three important moments. First of all, this report in our opinion, is one of the first attempts, one of the first steps to express the official position of the government as to the evaluation of the damage, immeasurable damage inflicted by the armed aggression against Ukraine, but through the prism of the human rights. So it's a human view of this problem, not only the measurement in figures, the damage to the property or infrastructure object and economic system and social system of Ukraine. As of today, there are numerous reports, very useful reports by esteemed international organizations, civil organizations. There is information provided by the Mission of United Nations on Human Rights regarding the persons afflicted or those who perished, and the International Organization for Migration, the Danish Refugee Council, European Commission, World Bank, and we can go forth. On and on, the majority of those reports were taken into consideration during preparation of this report with relevant references included. But it's utmostly important that with the support of the experts, which that was their task actually, that unique information was processed by the ministries and agencies, including the General Prosecutor's Office and other departments, and is the official evaluation of those losses and damages and consequences of the armed aggression which is happening. All this information is gathered and accumulated, and in the report you can see the reference as to, for example, as to the information of this or that agency. So this information is verified. So it's an attempt of the comprehensive evaluation of the losses and damage inflicted to the human rights based on the official information, and we did everything possible to develop the relevant visualization, graphs, tables, for the ease of understanding. And another important thing is that this report contains very detailed recommendations that should be complied with or implemented within the shortest period possible, and it draws attention to some require us to identify within the legal field, in legal law in effect, who are those persons who are affected by the armed aggression of Russia against Ukraine, and what can they count on in terms of support from the government of Ukraine, because the whole world together with Ukraine works on reparations on from the aggressor state, but those people to whom the attention was drawn by Mr. Dmytro, they require help here and now, those who lost their close ones or their health, and we will continue working on developing the relevant legislation to develop the concept and strategy for the complex view, for the complex consideration of the people affected by the aggression. And third, the report really contains very specific recommendations, and it's very important to ensure the monitoring of their implementation. It's important to have the international partners to be familiarized with them, and even now we support the translation of this report, and in the beginning 2022 we will have a printed English version of this report. And it's very important to track the changes in dynamics, and it would be very important that the relevant analysis has the relevant nature, and we could track not only further damages and destructions which will end soon, we hope, but also the positive changes, because hope is what keeps us all together. Thank you, Ms. Hanna. I will ask Mr. Dmytro Lubinets to return to the microphone, and we will have the Q&A session. If there are any questions in the studio, please express yourself. We have a microphone for you. Before you ask the questions, I want to tell you about the foster state. It's a diplomatic term which can do the consular services for the citizens of a third country. Good afternoon. Could you please tell us, as to the civil hostages, what is the number of people kept in Russian prisons, and what is the work being done for their return home? Thank you for your question. Tomorrow we will have an extended meeting with the representative of all the coordination staff with regard to the civil hostages. I cannot give you the exact figure. I'll tell you why, because it may impede the process for their return. We don't say the exact figures in order not to help the terrorist state. What is being done? We have an algorithm, we have a procedure developed for, even publicly, we announced certain format of cooperation with Moskalkova, the Commissioner for Human Rights of Russia. It's a separate issue of the exchange of information with regard to civil hostages. In accordance with the international humanitarian law, we cannot bring up the issue of exchange of the civil hostages. The definition we're using is that the civilians cannot be detained without reasons, without bringing any conviction in their regard. And the Russian Federation, and it's being documented by both us and international organizations, Russian Federation detains the citizens of Ukraine for months. It's the violation of Geneva Convention, and we require, and we will keep requiring, demanding Russian Federation to set them free. And we're working on the procedure of how to do it. I would like the journalists to focus on the questions which are subject to today's report. However, something tells me that Mr. Commissioner has answers to all the questions. Maria Lebedeva, information portal Zmina. I would like to get back to the statistics. Announced 46,000. This is what you said. Can you please tell us how this statistics is being drawn together, and how are those figures being documented? Because you referred to the figures provided by National Information Bureau? Can you give us more detail, and specifically regarding children, where we base our reports on the verified figures, the confirmed figures, and in accordance with the law in force, we have a register of the persons on the basis of the ministry, on the platform of the Ministry of Temporarily Occupied Territories, State Information Bureau. So those numbers, we get them first of all from them. And additionally, we work with international partners, so they verify or confirm the same figures, more or less. This is one of the tools that we use. We also try the verification procedure to be supported by Red Cross. Well, we have a very difficult communication with them, but one of the tools for additional verification of information is this is something that we're using now. Please. Good afternoon, Yulia Garina, Ukrinform. You said that you're preparing a report which will investigate the rights of the children and servicemen. So I have a question specifically with regard to those persons. Do you document any applications or reports for those missing in action for this category? And if you can break it down by regions. Thank you. Yes, we document such applications, and when I was saying about the separate special reports, that will be a separate report for the kids and a separate report for the civil hostages and prisoners of war. As to the figures, again, we will not promulgate the figures publicly, but we documented the missing in action in all regions which were under temporary occupation by Russian Federation or are still under temporary occupation. It's a huge number of people. And we document that the Russian Federation does not want even to inform us on where they keep those people. So the first region where we've seen a large number of missing persons was Kiev region. And for the time being, we cannot receive any information on where those civilians are. Those civilians which were captured and brought first to Belarus, and then they were transported to Russian Federation. And now we document that a part of those who returned to Ukraine, it's being used first of all through Crimea. So part of them still remain in Russian Federation. Maybe we can say about some others, well, it's thousands of people. Baranova Yana, the golden age of Ukraine, it's a complicated question. However, I still hope it will be solved someday and better within the shortest term. Regarding our citizens who are afflicted by war, the people convicted by Ukraine for life and who remain in the occupied territories. It's a large number of such people, and the penitentiary institutions, which ended up under occupation, the people are deported to Ukraine. So not only civilians, but also regular civilians, but also convicted. Are they being paid special attention, and what do you plan to do in their regard? Thank you. Well, first of all, I tried talking to Moskalkova to obtain the number of people of the citizens of Ukraine, and so one thing is what we understand according to our information, and second is what they are ready to confirm. And we see Russian Federation trying to implement the process of forced mobilization. So again, it's just another war crime where Russian Federation tries to use the citizens of Ukraine contrary to their desire. So they take direct part in the war against their country. So it can be used for propaganda videos, for example. The only thing I can say that any citizen of Ukraine, notwithstanding their status, their legal status in our country, in Russian Federation, they are all the citizens of Ukraine, and we're taking care of everybody. Any more questions? Alla Shershen Ukrinform. Recently, there was information that the representatives of ICRC visited our prisoners in Russian Federation. Do you have any information in this regard? Where are those prisoners and who are they? Yes, I have that information. On Saturday, I had a meeting with the president of the ICRC. So she came to Ukraine and she was in Kiev. I can tell you that we had a very uneasy conversation with her, where I emphasized that, in my opinion, International Committee for Red Cross does not comply with its mandate 100%. Yes, I got the information that 1 week ago, Russian Federation started letting the representatives of the International Committee of Red Cross to a small number of institutions where our prisoners of war and civil prisoners are staying. As to the number of those visited, we're still expecting for the official figures from ICRC to confirm this information from other sources. I'm still unable. We communicate with the relatives of the civil hostages on a daily basis, and for me, such information may only be confirmed when I get the signal that the relatives really started receiving new additional information from ICRC, because in compliance with the international humanitarian law, even I, as a Commissioner for Human Rights, ICRC cannot report even to me some specific information about the specific Ukrainian citizens. The only thing they can say that, yeah, we've been let through, we've got access. I cannot disclose publicly the number of institutions and where they were allowed to visit, in order not to provide any arguments to the Russian Federation that Red Cross discloses information to the Commissioner for Human Rights of Ukraine, which is the violation of the mandate of ICRC and the international humanitarian law. So the information about them starting to fulfilling their mandate in this part, yeah, we have this information, but I cannot still officially confirm it. Adriana Volyanik, online media Svidomi, can you please tell us on the way you work on search and return of Ukrainian children deported to Russia? If I tell you everything, it will in future, it may render it impossible for me in future to return somebody from Russian Federation. I can only tell you that these many representatives of our government agencies, law enforcement agencies are involved in this process. We're facing Russian Federation's attempt to impede this process. In certain cases, we expect today or maybe tomorrow, we expect to hear some good news about our kid, and after that, I will be able to say that Russian Commissioner for Human Rights was taking part in that process. So far, we're only hearing the words that they are ready to support this process. But as a system, we see that Russian Federation deported and keeps deporting Ukrainian children. They confirm it on official level. They changed their national legislation to facilitate the procedure of adopting Ukrainian children by Russian citizens, and when on the official website the representative of President of Russia, Lvova Belova, recognizes officially that she deports Ukrainian children, she takes part in that the Ukrainian children have very bad attitude, and she's like, oh God, they say glory to Ukraine and they sing Ukrainian songs. So in the end, what cannot not embarrass us, she's saying, okay, we will re-educate them. So we draw everyone's attention to this issue, and we demand that the forced deportation of children be persecuted by international tribunal. In continuation of this topic, there is a question under this live on the page of the Commissioner of Human Rights of Ukraine. So what are the cases of the violation of children's rights? Are there torture rooms for kids in the occupied territories? Yes, that was the first case when we documented the torturing of children. So such a cynicism of Russian Federation, I thought after Bucha and Irpin of what I've personally seen in Balaklia, 2 torture rooms that were in front of each other. I was talking to our citizens who were there. One guy, he spent 90 days in that torture room. He was telling me about the way he was tortured, how he was cut with a knife or burnt part of his body with the pieces of heated metal, or the Russians were preparing to execute him by shooting, and he was hearing the cries of the people on a daily basis. But the bottom, I thought that was the bottom, but the bottom is what I've seen in Kherson. We identified 10 torture rooms in Kherson region, so 4 in Kherson and 6 more in the region. So in Kherson we've seen 1 torture room where children were kept, and according to the evidences of the people who were there, they said, yeah, we knew that there were our Ukrainian kids right by our side. Even the occupier said, yeah, there is a torture room for the kids there. So you understand the difference was only that it was a moist room, and the only thing that they just threw a couple of 3 thin mats on the floor. Those are the better conditions for the kids without war. So it was not only the tortures that we documented, but we documented that children were not given water, they were only given water every other day. So they were kept almost always hungry. They were Russians used psychological pressure against them. They said that your parents left you behind, they will never come back. One boy was 14 years old. He was taken to that torture room only for taking picture of a damaged Russian material. So those children who ended up there, are they the relatives to other people detained, or are those who those were the children who were committing some acts of resistance against occupiers. So again, as I mentioned, that boy only took a picture of a damaged Russian armor vehicle, and he was kept in that torture room, and tortures were used against them. So another question from abroad, under our translation, our live translation. So the people who wants to protect their rights, can you add something of how people can protect their rights abroad? So we ask all the citizens of Ukraine, including those abroad, call our hotline. We built this system of the hotline anew. We're working from 9 to 20 weekdays without breaks. Even during air raid alerts, we found an opportunity for our employees to work from the safe shelters, and we work during Saturdays. After that, I personally get a report for a week past where I see the breakdown of those who called, what are the main issues, and who applied from abroad with what issues. So we established the reaction. We have a coordination, as I mentioned, with diplomatic institutions, but in my opinion, I relaunched the cooperation with my colleagues who have the same mandate as I do, but in their countries. I mean, the commissioners for human rights. I haven't seen a single commissioner, well, with certain exceptions, well, who support countries who support Russian federations, they're vis-a-vis. All others react in a very rapid manner. They bring up the issues, for example, in Italy, where we documented the mass violation of rights of our citizens when our children come there with their official foster parents. According to the national law of Italy, they don't consider them as the official representatives, and they appoint their representatives on behalf of Italian government. And the worst is that we documented the cases when they tried to take away our Ukrainian children from their foster parents and to give them to Italian foster parents. I had a meeting with Commissioner for Human Rights of Italy. They have a different system. It's for 5 of them there with one principle. We developed a special agreement between the governments of Ukraine and Italy. It's now undergoing the procedure of signing, and I applied to my Italian colleagues to expedite this through the mechanism of pressure, maybe on Italian government, to have this treaty signed. And one of the problems solved there is the problem of our children. So I use the new mandates. Believe me, I know how to read from abroad. A penultimate question, just one more detailization, since the subject of kids was already brought up. Recently, the human rights organizations announced the number of children adopted by Russians, and there was information from your office that that we're talking not about the adoption, but for foster parents. So are we talking about the adoption or fostering? Well, we still don't have confirmation of this information so far. We're working on that. But again, one thing is when it can be said by our organizations for human rights. I officially, as the first source on behalf of Ukraine, I can only tell you if this information is verified. For the time being, we attempt to verify it, but according to the documented figures, the verified number of children is more than 12,000, including 8,600 forcibly deported to Russian Federation. Well, obviously those numbers differ when you see some figures in public media saying that about 150,000 Ukrainian children are in Russian Federation. I can only assume that, and this is why we launched this online platform, Children of War, where you can see the number of verified children, which means that I, as the Commissioner for Human Rights, together with the law enforcement agencies and Office of the Prosecutor General, we all know where the kid was deported from, where they lived, in what status in Ukraine, where they are now in Russian Federation, in which status, and what actions are being taken in regard of that kid by Russian Federation. And in any separate case, we open a criminal suit conducted by our law enforcement agencies. So in public media, you can see different figures. I can only tell you about the confirmed verified numbers. I can assume that it's a lot of them, but I want to draw attention of those who monitor the online platform. The number of verified cases keeps growing all the time, so we can assume that those figures may coincide one day, I mean in public media, and the verified number, so it takes time, and it's work in progress. So you don't have any verification of adoption so far. For the time being, we receive the information on the possible adoption, and we verify those cases. And the last question I'm having, I want to return to the report presented today, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that generally this report raises the bar of responsibility of the state in front of its citizens. It looks very noble. It gives hope to the citizens for legal help, for material resources. It expands the conscience of a government in this regard, but obviously many people may dislike it. Maybe some are not quite fond of the recommendations, like Ministry of Finance, and who will need to find more resources, our international partners or the government in general who will have to work more. So are those recommendations and changes timely? I don't know how correct it is to say, how correct is it to raise the bar during times like this. Maybe you said correctly that some may dislike it. I know that they may, and I know that I will have a lot of critique in my address and in regard of my institution, but this is what differs us. We are independent institution who takes care of the rights of the citizens of Ukraine. It's not only noble, but I want to tell all the directors and managers that from the point of view of international law, we cannot expect to receive funds from Russian Federation or other international partners, but in compliance with the international humanitarian law, the government, the state should provide the whole range of rights of the citizens of the country. It was a discovery for me as well a couple of years ago, when even in the temporarily occupied territories, the citizens of Ukraine could report, could apply to the International Court for Human Rights, and they appoint the state of Ukraine as the other party, even notwithstanding that the aggressor state who controls the territory on a timely basis, they should be liable for everything. So on the level of international humanitarian law, we're responsible for that, and the issue is solved. And secondly, it's the question of our civilization choice. This is what we fight for during the last 9 years. We fight for democracy, for European values. The highest value is the human rights. It's complicated, it's difficult, it's not easy, it's costly, it's expensive, but it's in the thoughts of some managers. They will want to put responsibility on the terrorist state. Yeah, we have to do it, but first of all, we have to protect the rights of our citizens. How to get reparations from Russian Federation is the next thing. People are living now. Their rights are being violated now, and they need help now. And in this regard, I'm not to be liked by everybody. I just have to fulfill my mandate on a professional basis. I understand that the controlling mandate, my mandate, apart from recommendations, it will... Why I paid attention to this from the very beginning. The recommendation for me is a half of the business. The other part of the business, another half, is how I will then control the implementation of these recommendations. And I know that the most influence on the adoption of such implementation of recommendations, it's our civil society who has this influence, who can exercise this influence. So I will do everything publicly, so the civil society hears it, so the managers see it, and they do their job. So this is what differs us from Russian Federation. This is what we're fighting for, and this is what our heroes perish every day. Dmytro Lubinets, the Commissioner for Human Rights of the Parliament of Ukraine, and the special reports for compliance with the rights of the persons affected by the armed aggression of Russian Federation against Ukraine. Thanks everybody for attention. Glory to Ukraine. Stand with Ukraine. Follow our announcements.